In the last video, we saw that defining a variable inside of a function creates its own scope. But what happens if two variables in different scopes share the same name? Let's find out. So we've seen that variables have different scopes based on the functions in which they're defined. But what happens if you define a variable with a name that's already defined at a higher level of scope? Well, you can do that, and it's called shadowing a variable. So let's take an example down at the bottom of our script here. Let's create a variable called myColor, and we'll set it to blue. We'll do a console.log, and we'll say myColor before myFunc. And myFunc is a variable we'll be defining in a moment. And we'll add as our second value, myColor. So just so we don't get any other output, what I'm going to do is, again, comment out our previous code. So this is all pretty simple. It's everything we've seen before, simply declaring a variable called myColor, giving it a value blue, and we'll use console.log to see what its value is in our JavaScript console. So we have it saved out, and we'll go back and refresh. And we'll see myColor before myFunc, and the value is blue. This is pretty much expected behavior, and it should be pretty obvious what's going on. So now let's add a function we'll call myFunc. To do this, we'll use the function keyword, call it myFunc. We'll use parentheses there to define there are no arguments to this function. And now in the body of the function, we'll define a variable called myColor, and we'll set its value to yellow. So now inside of our function, we'll call console.log. We'll say myColor inside myFunc. And then we'll display myColor. Now again, we have to execute myFunc, so we'll do that here by doing myFunc. And we'll save it out. When we go to our browser and we refresh the page, we can see that myColor inside of myFunc is now yellow. But now the question is myColor inside of myFunc the same variable of myColor in the global scope? Well, we can test that by doing another console.log after myFunc is executed. So we'll do console.log, and it will be myColor after myFunc. And we'll again pass it myColor. So now let's take a look at what that value actually is by refreshing our page. Now we'll see myColor after myFunc is blue. And that's because what happens is by defining a variable inside of myFunc called myColor, we're creating a completely separate variable that's only accessible through myFunc. And this is due to how scoping of variables works. If we gave it a different name, it wouldn't matter because we wouldn't be able to access that variable from outside of myFunc. However, since we've named our variable the same thing as a global variable, it still creates a local variable within myFunc that's completely separate from the global one. So when we say myColor equals yellow, we're not affecting the global variable. And this is to say the variable myColor inside of myFunc is shadowing a global variable. Now this can be useful because we don't have to be concerned with the names of variables in higher scopes than we're working. We can name our variable anything we want within reason without worrying that myColor may be defined at a higher level and we might accidentally interfere with it. Because we've defined a variable called myColor within myFunc, we're now unable to access the global myColor from within myFunc. Now this may be okay, we may not care about the global color, but it's something you have to be aware of when shadowing a variable like this. Now the way we shadowed our variable is by using the var keyword. If we were to accidentally or intentionally leave out the var definition here, instead of declaring a local variable called myColor, instead what we are doing is setting a value to the global myColor variable. So by simply deleting that var keyword, we've changed how this code will work. Instead of being blue, yellow, blue in our code down here, if we refresh, we'll now see it's blue, yellow, yellow. And that's because now my color is not a local shadowed variable. Instead, it's all referring to the same global myColor variable. Now I'm going to put this back. And while we're talking about scoping of variables with var or without var, I want to show you another important bug that you might run into that's very important to understand. So I'm going to leave var myColor as a shadowed variable that's local to my func. However, down here, I'm going to create a variable called myNumber and set it to the value 42. Now you'll notice I left off the var. So what do you think might happen? Well, myNumber is not declared at the global scope, so you may wonder what it's going to assign to. So let's just run it. But first, let's add a console.log to see what it looks like in the global scope. So we'll say myNumber after myfunc. And if we run this, we can see that from the global scope, we're actually able to access myNumber. And that's because from within any JavaScript function, if we assign to a variable that doesn't exist yet, JavaScript by default will create a global variable with that name and assign to it. Now this may not seem like a problem because your code still may execute. However, it can become a problem when doing loops or calling a function multiple times because you may be expecting this variable to be reset in each function or in each loop. However, since it's a global variable, it'll maintain its state and cause some really weird bugs. That's why it's very, very important anytime you declare a variable to ensure that var precedes the variable definition. If we save this out now with var myNumber is 42, we'll see that myNumber is not defined just like it should be. This is a very common bug that can cause you a lot of confusion. So if you are running into weird bugs where variables don't have quite the value you thought they should, check all around for your variable definitions and make sure they all have the var keyword. This is very, very important. Up next, we'll take a more in-depth look into variable scope and some best practices to use with variables.